The Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa has bled more than 15 million rand in the hiring and firing of its former CEO, Zolani Matthews. Last month, you'll recall that Matthews was shown the door for the third time shortly after being reinstated following the Labour Court ruling. Matthews's first termination of contract came after it was discovered that he had dual citizenship and had failed to declare this, which paused the security threats. At least that's what was said. Now, let's speak to the man about his own story and what he thinks happened exactly at Prasa. Zolani Matthews, good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your time. So, the Prasa board recently announcing that you and the agency mutually agreed to terminate your employment. Are you able to confirm here tonight that that separation was indeed by mutual agreement? And in your own words, tell us what exactly was the nub of the issue?
Well, the termination was certainly not by mutual consent. It was a unilateral decision that the board of Prasa took after the Labour Court ordered my reinstatement at the review application that was brought by Prasa when they lost the arbitration that was held under Judge Nugent. So they took a decision once it became clear that they had to give effect to the ruling of the Labour Court, and I was not prepared to accept a settlement. My position was that I should be reinstated to the position as the arbitration award had clearly laid out, and the Labour Court ruling enforced that decision. Therefore, I should actually go back to my job. And I wrote to the board after the 15-day period elapsed, in fact, to the chairperson of the board, after the 15-day period had elapsed, under which they could file an appeal, and indicated that I was ready to go back to work. Please let me know when I could come back and resume my duties and get my office ready. We received a letter soon after that informing me that I was fired. I still remained fired, and the board was still considering the Labour Court judgment. Yeah. This was a letter sent by their lawyers, and we were quite surprised, but anyway, it certainly was not by mutual consent. And then a series of meetings took place subsequent to that. Yeah. And I made it clear in one meeting, I was invited to meet with the chairperson of the board, Ms. Makamo, and she asked me point blank, what do I want? And I said, I want my job back. The issue of settlement and money is not really of any interest to me, because you cannot compensate me for the damage to my reputation, not only my name, but my family's name. And I'm really not going to sit here and discuss coming back or accepting a settlement. All I want is you give effect to the ruling of the Labour Court judgment. Yeah. She then said, well, we've appointed another person. There's already an incumbent in position, and therefore it would not be possible for you to come back. My response to that was that your decision to appoint another person actually was against what we said you should not do, pending the outcome of the review application that you brought, and that the judgment or the ruling of Judge Nugent still stands until set aside by a competent court. And you ignored that and made an appointment. So the issue of an incumbent is really not my problem. It's the board's problem to resolve. A day later, I was then sent a letter dismissing me.
That's a lot of information. But having gone through some of what has happened,
yes.
At issue here, at first, was that you had failed to disclose your dual citizenship. And when that was checked as part of your security clearance, it was a big red flag. That was the official version. And then, at some point, poor performance is brought up. At which point did poor performance come up?
Poor performance came up much later in the process. But if we could just go back to the issue of the dual citizenship. I was appointed and went through a security clearance process by the State Security Agency and was interviewed in that process, as well as having a lie detector test that was carried out. State Security had copies of my British passport because they requested them at the interview. Those were provided to them. The only thing that I had not done was on the form indicate citizenship. Citizenship for me is Republic of South Africa. That's my citizenship. The British passport is a function of having grown up in exile. So the fact that the board were not aware of the dual nationality, as far as I'm concerned, and what Judge Nugent made clear, what is the issue of citizenship got to do with the running of trains? And that's really the question. So my citizenship was really, as far as I'm concerned, a red herring insofar as a requirement for the position, because State Security wrote and said that I failed to get top secret clearance. At no time in the 9 months that I was at Prasa did I ever see a document, much less marked confidential, secret, or top secret. There's no such thing. The board then decided, after the arbitration, to then put in place this issue of poor performance, when it's well known that the labor laws require that if an employee is going to be held accountable for poor performance, there are certain steps that the employer must take to remedy the situation before they can dismiss the employer. That was not done in my case. It was just a unilateral decision, again, by the board to cite poor performance and then use poor performance. After the arbitration, they failed at the arbitration. They then came back a week later and said, oh, we meant to fire you for poor performance before the security issue came up, but we are now firing you for poor performance now. And at the same time, we're going to launch a review application against Judge Nugent's arbitration award.
So poor performance is brought at a later stage to justify your dismissal. The official version to the public was that you had failed to disclose your British citizenship. You had multiple wins. Private arbitration, you won. Labor court, you won.
Yes.
It then comes back that you are being offered your job back, but there is an incumbent.
Yes.
When you try to make sense of all of this, what was at the heart of your dismissal? Because if you remember back, there's a certain text message that is sent to you by the then minister who insinuates that the then chairperson of the board at Prasa, Mr. Leonard Ramatlakane, does not want you. Make sense of all of this for us.
Well, perhaps just to give some context, 2 weeks after my appointment, I received a letter from the Director General of the Ministry of Transport concerning a tender called the Wilmington Depot tender. It was a tender for 2.6 billion rand. And he indicated in his letter that the internal audit at the Department of Transport was not willing to pass this or recommend it to the Minister for signature. The requirement is that over a certain threshold, tenders go to the minister at least for concurrence. He then in the letter suggested that you might want to go to an outside counsel and perhaps get an opinion on this. But as far as it goes at the moment, we're not going to approve it. I did do that. I instructed the acting head of legal at the time to go to the law firms that were being utilized. And I requested a particular advocate that I knew, a senior counsel that I knew very well, that I had worked with, or he had done some work for us when I was at the port regulator. I was chairing the port regulator at the time. And so I asked him to be appointed. His report, which was very thorough, came back, and he said that he would strongly recommend against the award of this tender to the company that had been selected because they had submitted their papers late. They had not demonstrated the capacity to complete a project of that size. They'd never done a project of 2.6 billion rand. But at the same time, I did not inform the board that I had undertaken an outside, or sought an outside opinion, because when I checked, on the approval, the board, except for one board member, had approved the tender. So I then went ahead and conducted, or had that inquiry conducted. So I think that when that came to the attention of the board, that was something I believe, and in meetings and in correspondence that Mr. Ramatlakane sent to the minister asking why was this tender not being approved because the board had approved it, not being aware that there was actually, he was unaware that there was actually a very, very detailed and comprehensive opinion that had actually said that this tender should not proceed. And that, I think, was something which the board was certainly not happy about when they came to learn of it.
Yeah. If we are to take poor performance, as the current board says is the reason for your dismissal, you were in a probation period.
Yes.
I seem to be aware of certain recommendations that may have been made to you about going to certain institutions in order to up your level of leadership. Are you able to tell us any information in that regard, and whether or not this was material to your?
No, it wasn't. I don't believe it was material. What I had a meeting with Mr. Ramatlakane at the time, and we discussed one particular aspect was around rail knowledge. Prasa's fundamental problem is really not one of, there are enough engineers in the building. There are over 18,000 employees. A sizable chunk of those are engineers. Prasa's biggest problem is efficient management and making sure that systems can actually work, that can actually make sure that the business functions as a business, and it is meant to. I think we've seen that across pretty much most of the state-owned enterprises in the country. So it was really one around management. So I had an engagement with the University of Stellenbosch, some of the professors there in Rail, University of Pretoria, and we started some discussions around that. But before those could go anywhere, then I was suspended and then I was terminated. But I don't think, in my view, poor performance is really not an issue. I think it was used as it's a convenient way to remove executives when boards make a determination that this is not really the person we want to work with for whatever reason there may be, but I don't believe poor performance, because I think that we were getting it right, and the right people were coming into place to make sure that we could move the organization forward. And that seems not to have been something that the board, and it's the same board pretty much that still sits at Prasa today.
Yeah. One of the biggest unions in the metal workers space, that's NUMSA, said you treated workers with disdain, especially when dealing with the crisis at Autopax. Might that have been part of the reason for recommending that you go to institutions in order to up your leadership skills?
No, not at all. And I think that the important thing to note about the Autopax situation is that you have a company that was losing substantial revenue. In fact, if it was a private company, Autopax would have been declared insolvent and filed for bankruptcy. We made that recommendation a number of times to the board, and what was happening was that Prasa was actually, and against PFMA regulations, was actually supporting and paying the salaries of staff, whilst we had a voluntary VSP program that was in place that we were trying to motivate for workers either to take the VSP or to be retrained in certain categories of employment within the Prasa organization. And this, the board did not want to accept this and kept on instructing that we keep making payments and we keep making payments to the staff to support that. And it's not sustainable, because Prasa shouldn't be paying for Autopax salaries when it's a company that's no longer functional. And we should be looking at a way, how can we restructure, how can we reorganize that business? Do we sell it off, and do we make it, or find a more way to make it more profitable? Yeah. But this was not something that they were prepared to listen to, unfortunately. And unfortunately, yes, unions are extremely important, particularly important to the organization. But at the same time, Are we running a business, or are we going to run a company that is going to gradually suck money out of the fiscus? And I've seen that. I saw that particularly at the post office. And you interviewed my good friend and colleague, former colleague Mark Barnes here last week, and you've seen what that has happened at the post office. Prasa shouldn't be allowed to slide into that same position.
You mentioned earlier that your situation at Prasa, your entire experience, not only impugns your personal reputation, but that of your family.
Yes.
Many people may not be aware, perhaps because you use different surnames. You are the brother to the recent Minister of International Relations and Cooperation,
Yes.
Naledi Pandor.
That's correct.
When you look at the events that have occurred at Prasa, what is it that you think really was at the heart of your employment being cut short whilst you were on probation? You had not even started work, actually.
Yeah, I think that Prasa is a very complex organization, and it's perhaps the only organization of the state-owned entities that sits with a very large capital expenditure budget that is unfortunately attracts a lot of attention and abuse, and there are some people who are willing to go to any lengths to systematically abuse and take and take and take, so that the organization continues to be to be dysfunctional. And it has flourished. It could go back and cite the derailed report by the former public protector, and I think there's still a continuation of exactly the same events, and that is something which, unfortunately, is perpetuated throughout, and probably even today. There are probably instances of you could call it corruption, but abuse of the system that are taking place within the organization. And there are people that are comfortable with the status quo insofar as that's concerned and would not want to have that disturbed. And I think that one of the reasons why I was shown the door and continue to be shown the door, because I will disturb a lot of that activity.
If given an opportunity to take your job back, as opposed to the amount of money that has now been paid out to you, and I'm trying to marry what you are saying, that with large institutions such as Prasa, there are people who are constantly on the take. Firstly, is this a prudent way of managing public money by the people that are leading this specific institution?
No, absolutely not. And the reason I went ahead and litigated, and I had a really fantastic legal team led by Peter Harris, that really ensured that the letter of the law was followed throughout. And this is something that we have seen systematically from Prasa, that they will go to great lengths to spend taxpayer money to continuously litigate against employees that they're not comfortable with. I think you've even had people like Martha Ngoye on here and spoken to them. And it's something that I think has been, it's allowed to slide, and it's become part of the norm and part of the culture that we have in our country. So I wasn't really interested in getting a payoff, really. It's not because I don't want money or don't like money. That's not the issue for me. The issue for me is that I was employed for a specific purpose, and in my view, had the capacity, as well as I had identified people within the organization who I felt could take the organization forward in the way in which it deserved to be taken forward for the benefit of the commuters, because ultimately the commuters are the ones who suffer. And this is going to be, I think this is going to be a continuous problem for the organization, because you've got two opposing forces, those who want to take and those who want to do the work and make the institution function. And until that is resolved, then we're going to see a perpetuation of the same problem.
People will say it's probably an unfair question to you, given your experience there. recent experience. But when you look at the events as they have unfolded, I remember the one news headline from one of the news agencies was that it was a comedy of errors.
Sure.
At Prasa. Do you think that the leadership from the board right down to the executive is capable of taking Prasa forward?
Well, I only know, I think, 5 members of the current board. I don't know the new appointees, so I wouldn't work with them. But the 5 I worked with, I don't think they have the capacity, the intellectual capacity, the mental capacity, or the commitment to the organization. And I think that everything that they say is just basically is just not something that you can ascribe to really committed and serious and diligent and interested in the best, or that are interested in the best interest of the organization, ultimately. Otherwise, they would resign, even just if the comedy of errors around my own case, spending taxpayers' money on litigation for almost 3 years, and I'm just one of many. So if you total it all up, wild estimate, 30 to 50 million rand on litigation, just on labor matters alone, before you even look at the litigation around tenders and tender awards. It's running, it's a colossal amount of money. Can the taxpayer, should the taxpayer really bear that burden? Because it's not their money that they're using when they litigate. It's public money that they're using to litigate endlessly. Yeah. So if I just for the sake of argument say that my own costs were run around 4 million rand, what are their costs running at? So it's something that's not sustainable ultimately, and I think that it's you know, places like Scopa, organs like Scopa, need to take a serious look at the functioning of the passenger rail agency, how it's managed, whether the Auditor General is paying attention to all this litigation, people sitting at home and being paid to sit at home and to wait. It's, in a private company, you couldn't do that, and you wouldn't do that. The shareholders wouldn't allow you to do it. So the shareholder bears the ultimate responsibility to ensure the proper functioning of the organization. And if they don't, then the shareholders then should be held accountable.
Do you believe that your personal reputation has been damaged? If so, what is your next plan forward?
I think to the extent possible, my personal reputation has been vindicated in some ways, because the board kept on pursuing litigation, thinking that we have this in the bag, we're going to win. I don't know which one of the legal advisors of this. I know there's an advocate, sort of an advocate on the board. I'm not sure if he was the one saying the chances of success, the prospects of success are very good, and that hasn't happened. So my own reputation will remain intact in some ways, because it's something which I've spent a lifetime building, and my family before that, so that will remain intact. Fortunately, I've got other options in life, and I'll continue to work towards some of the things that, you know, the ambitions that I have in terms of my career in business, and go back to that. But I think my time with SOEs has been an experience that I don't think I'll be rushing back to anytime soon. I'm too old anyway, so, so I don't see myself returning to that.
Finally, when you look at the fact that you perhaps wanted to help
Sure.
the South African government by lending your skills, you have dual citizenship, we know that. Do you think that South Africa is still a place for you, given the fact that you have options at hand? And what do you make of the current environment where there is now a government of national unity? A political question like that is not misplaced,
Sure.
given your family name.
Well, I think that our country is still the greatest country on the continent, in the world. We're very blessed with so many natural resources, an abundance of natural resources. Our biggest challenge is a challenge of leadership. Consistent leadership that is going to take the country forward. And I think that is perhaps the biggest challenge that we face and dealing with some of the societal issues that our country faces, unemployment, crime. Well, we've been fortunate. I guess we've had no load shedding for quite some time now. But there are still some structural problems that we have as a country and an economy that still has to come out of some levels of recession. So I think that the country has got to come to terms with that. And I believe that the electorate did at the last election. I think that there was a clear recognition and a clear pointing of a direction that the country should move in. But for me, I still believe that South Africa, there are some great opportunities, but I'm fortunate because I was exposed globally from an early age. I lived in England, I lived in America, and I have that at least as a fallback on. But this is still the place that I want to be. This is still where the opportunities are. I thank Prasa for one thing. The colleague I work with now was my colleague. It was the group CFO at Prasa. So we've decided to hang out our own shingle and try and do business for ourselves. And you know, touch wood, it's going very, very well. And we're very happy with that.
Zolani Matthews, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity and a pleasure to be here.